Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defender as it moved through the dark space toward Kepler 7 station. The stars looked cold and distant through the main window. His hands gripped the metal railing as he watched the neutral station grow larger on the screen. This meeting could change everything between humans and the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrians had been attacking human colonies for 3 months now. What started as simple raids for supplies had become something much worse. Real people were dying. Families were being torn apart. The attacks were getting bolder and more cruel each time. Morrison turned to look at Ambassador Lisa Hayes as she walked onto the bridge. She was Earth's best diplomat when it came to dealing with alien species. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat style, and her blue eyes showed the weight of what she carried on her shoulders. She had spent years learning how to talk to different alien races. She understood their customs and their ways of thinking. The Zephyrians are already docked at the station, Morrison told her. Their war fleet is holding position just outside the neutral zone. Hayes nodded. She had expected this. The Zephyrians never went anywhere without showing their military strength. They were a proud warrior race that believed might made right. Their bodies were covered in hard crystalline plates that sparkled like diamonds. They were tall and strong, and had been conquering other worlds for hundreds of years. "Any word from their war prime Kethril?" Hayes asked. "He sent a message saying he would listen to what we have to say," Morrison replied. "But he also said that humans should prepare to accept their fate as a conquered species." Hayes sighed. This was going to be harder than she had hoped. She had been working with alien diplomacy for 20 years. She had seen wars prevented and peace treaties signed. But the Zephyrians were different. They saw kindness as weakness and peace as surrender. The Defender docked at Kepler 7 station with a soft bump. The station was built by the Galactic Council to be neutral ground where different species could meet safely. Its halls were wide and tall to accommodate beings of all sizes. The air was kept at a temperature that most species could handle. Morrison walked with Hayes to the main meeting chamber. The room was huge with a high ceiling that curved up into darkness. In the center was a large round table made of smooth black stone. One side was already occupied by the Zephyrian delegation. War Prime Kethril stood nearly 8 feet tall. His crystalline armor caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. His face was hard and angular with glowing red eyes that seemed to burn with inner fire. Behind him stood 6 other Zephyrian warriors in similar armor. Hayes took her seat across from Kethril. She placed a datapad on the table and looked directly at the War Prime. Morrison stood behind her along with 2 other human officers. "War Prime Kethril," Hayes began in a calm voice. "I thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I hope we can find a peaceful solution to the current conflict." Kethril's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Peaceful solution? You humans are even weaker than I thought. You ask for peace when you should be begging for mercy." Hayes did not react to the insult. She had heard worse from other species. "I have brought evidence of the attacks on our colonies. 17 raids in the past 3 months. Over 200 civilian casualties. These were not military targets. These were farming communities and research stations." She activated her datapad and holographic images appeared above the table. The images showed the aftermath of Zephyrian attacks. Burned buildings, destroyed vehicles, hospital records of injured colonists, the faces of the dead. "Your forces have been targeting civilian populations," Hayes continued. "Children have been killed. Families have been destroyed. This violates the Galactic Accords on Warfare." Kethril looked at the images without any sign of emotion. "A strong take from the weak. This is the natural order of the universe. Your species is weak. You hide behind your technology and your treaties. You do not fight like true warriors." "We prefer to solve our problems through discussion and compromise," Hayes replied. "We believe that different species can work together for mutual benefit." "Weakness," Kethril spat. "Your colonies are soft targets. Your people run instead of fighting. This proves that humans are prey animals who should accept their place in the food chain." Hayes felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. We are here to offer you a choice. Stop the attacks on our colonies and we can discuss trade. Agreements. Our worlds have resources that your people need. We can work together instead of fighting. Kethril stood up suddenly. His crystalline armor clinked as he moved. You offer us scraps when we can take everything. Why should we trade for what we can simply claim by force? Because the alternative will be worse for everyone, Hayes said. She stood up as well. We have tried to be reasonable. We have tried to find peaceful solutions. But our patience is not unlimited. The War Prime laughed again. Is that a threat? What can you possibly do to us? Your military is small and weak. Your ships are outnumbered 10-1. Your weapons are inferior to ours. Hayes reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device. She placed it on the table and activated it. The device projected a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, showing the locations of human colonies in Zephyrian territory. This is our final warning, Hayes said. Her voice was still calm, but there was something different in her tone now. Something that made Morrison stand up straighter behind her. We have been showing restraint because we hope to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. We have been trying to find a peaceful solution because we believe that all intelligent species deserve to exist. The map zoomed in to show the recent attack sites. Red markers indicated where Zephyrian forces had struck human colonies. But if you continue these attacks, Hayes continued, if you continue to target our civilians and ignore our attempts at diplomacy, then we will be forced to respond with measures that we would prefer not to use. Kethril leaned forward. What? Measures? What can you pathetic humans possibly do that would concern the mighty Zephyrian Empire? Hayes looked directly into his burning red eyes. We can take the gloves off. The War Prime stared at her for a long moment. Then he threw back his head and laughed louder than before. Gloves off? What does that even mean? You humans and your strange sayings. You speak in riddles because you have no real power. Hayes deactivated the device and put it back in her jacket. I have delivered our message. The choice is yours. Peace or the alternative. She turned to leave, but Kethril called after her. Wait, you want to know what I choose? I choose to show you what real power looks like. I choose to teach your species their proper place in the universe. Hayes stopped walking but did not turn around. Then you have chosen poorly. In 1 week, Kethril announced, I will attack your largest colony world. I will show the galaxy. What happens to species that threaten the Zephyrian Empire? Your people will die screaming and the survivors will beg to serve us. Now Hayes did turn around. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard as steel. Then in 1 week, you will learn why humanity has been trying so hard to avoid this outcome. She walked out of the chamber with Morrison and the other officers following behind her. Kethril watched them go with amusement. These humans were even more pathetic than he had thought. They made empty threats and walked away when faced with real power. Back on the Defender, Morrison asked Hayes what she thought would happen next. He will attack, Hayes said. And then everything will change. She activated her personal communicator and sent a coded message to Earth. The message was brief, but its meaning was clear to those who received it. The diplomatic phase was over. It was time to prepare for what came next. The Defender left Kepler-7 station and headed back toward human space. Behind them, the Zephyrian War fleet began to move toward their next target. Neither side knew that this meeting would be remembered as the last time anyone underestimated humanity. 2 weeks had passed since the meeting at Kepler-7 station. The Zephyrian Empire had ignored every attempt at further communication. Their war fleets moved through space like hungry predators searching for the perfect target. That target turned out to be New Kansas, a peaceful agricultural world on the edge of human space. Commander Rick Barnes stood in the command center of the New Kansas Defense Station. Through the large windows he could see the green fields that stretched to the horizon. Farmers were working their crops under the warm yellow sun. Children played in the small towns scattered across the planet. Nobody knew that death was coming from the stars. Barnes had only 3 patrol ships under his command. The U's Guardian, the UES Protector, and the UES Sentinel were small vessels designed for routine patrols and search missions. They carried basic weapons and shields. They were never meant to fight a real war. The alarm started ringing at 0800 hours. Barnes rushed to the main display screen as his communications officer reported incoming ships. 20 Zephyrian vessels dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. They were moving fast toward New Kansas. Send out the evacuation warning, Barnes ordered. All civilians to emergency shelters, contact Earth Command and tell them we are under attack. The 3 human ships launched from the defense station and moved to intercept the Zephyrian fleet. Barnes knew they had no chance of winning, but they had to try. 50,000 people lived on New Kansas. Most of them were farmers and their families. They had come here to build new lives far from the crowded cities of Earth. Paul Johnson was working in his wheat field when the sirens started. He looked up at the sky and saw the distant flashes of weapons fire. His wife Mary came running from their house with their twin daughters Amy and Kate. The girls were only 8 years old and they were scared by the loud noises. "Daddy, what's happening?" Amy asked. Paul picked up both girls and started running toward the emergency shelter. "We have to go underground for a while. It's going to be okay." But Paul knew it might not be okay. Everyone on New Kansas had heard about the attacks on other colonies. They knew the Zephyrians showed no mercy to civilians. In space above the planet, the 3 human ships fought bravely against impossible odds. The Guardian fired its missiles at the lead Zephyrian vessel, but they bounced off the enemy shields. The Protector tried to use its laser cannons, but the Zephyrian armor was too strong. The Sentinel attempted to ram one of the enemy ships, but was destroyed by plasma fire before it could make contact. Barnes watched his ships die one by one. The Guardian lasted 15 minutes before taking a direct hit to its engine room. The Protector fought for 20 minutes before its hull was breached in 3 places. Within half an hour, all 3 human ships were floating debris in the cold vacuum of space. The Zephyrian fleet moved toward New Kansas without any opposition. War Prime Kethril stood on the bridge of his flagship and smiled. These humans were even weaker than he had expected. Their ships were toys compared to Zephyrian war vessels. "Begin the bombardment," Kethril ordered. "Target the cities first. I want the survivors to watch their homes burn." The first plasma bolt struck the capital city of New Haven. The hospital exploded in a ball of fire. The school where children had been learning about other worlds was reduced to ash. The library where families gathered to read stories was turned into a smoking crater. Paul Johnson held his family close as the ground shook above their underground shelter. Dust fell from the ceiling and the lights flickered. Other families huddled together in the darkness. Mrs. Wilson was crying for her son, who worked at the spaceport. Old Mr. Carter tried to comfort his grandchildren, who had never seen violence before. The bombardment continued for 3 hours. The Zephyrians were methodical in their destruction. They targeted hospitals and schools first. Then they hit the power stations and water treatment plants. They wanted to make sure the survivors would suffer before they died. Barnes and his remaining staff watched from the defense station as their world burned. The communication arrays were destroyed so they could not call for help. The planetary shields had failed within the first hour of the attack. There was nothing they could do but watch and wait. When the bombardment stopped, Zephyrian ground forces landed near the major population centers. They moved through the ruins looking for survivors. Any humans they found were captured and brought to collection points. The Zephyrians wanted prisoners for their victory broadcast. Paul Johnson heard boots marching above the shelter. The heavy footsteps of crystalline warriors echoed through the tunnels. Someone was banging on the shelter door with something metal. The sound was getting louder. "Open this door," a voice called out in broken human language. "Come out or we will blast it open." Paul looked at his wife and daughters. Mary was holding the girls so tight they could barely breathe. Amy and Kate were trying not to cry, but tears ran down their faces. "Stay behind me," Paul whispered to his family. The shelter door was torn off its hinges. Zephyrian soldiers in gleaming armor stood in the doorway. Their red eyes glowed in the darkness. They pointed their weapons at the terrified humans. "You will come with us," the lead soldier said. "You will serve the Zephyrian Empire or you will die." Paul stepped forward. "These are children. They have done nothing wrong. Please let them go." The Zephyrian soldier laughed. "Children grow up to be enemies. Better to deal with them now." The soldier raised his weapon, but another voice stopped him. War Prime Kethril walked into the shelter. He was even more terrifying up close. His crystalline armor was covered in strange symbols that seemed to move in the light. "Not yet," Kethril said. "We need them alive for the broadcast. The galaxy must see what happens to species that threaten us." The Johnson family and the other shelter survivors were forced outside. The world they had known was gone. New Haven was a field of rubble and ash. Smoke rose from dozens of fires. Bodies lay in the streets. Kethril ordered his soldiers to set up recording equipment. He wanted to broadcast his victory to every world in the galaxy. He wanted other species to see the price of defying the Zephyrian Empire. "Citizens of the galaxy," Kethril announced as the cameras rolled, "today you witness the fate of those who oppose us. The human colony of New Kansas is no more. 8,000 humans have died. Their cities are destroyed. Their military is defeated." He gestured to the captured humans who were forced to kneel in the ruins of their homes. "These survivors will serve as an example. They will work as slaves until they die. This is the destiny of all weak species." Kethril pulled out his personal weapon and pointed it at Commander Barnes. This human was their military leader. He thought he could protect them from the might of the Zephyrian Empire. Barnes looked up at the War Prime without fear. "You may kill me, but others will remember what you did here. Someone will make you pay for this." "Who will make me pay?" Kethril laughed. "Your pathetic Earth government? Your weak military? You have no power to threaten us." He pulled the trigger and Barnes fell to the ground. The other prisoners screamed and cried. Paul Johnson held his daughters closer as they watched their world's defender die. "This is just the beginning," Kethril announced to the cameras. "Every human world will suffer the same fate. Every human will learn to serve or die. The age of human expansion is over. The age of Zephyrian dominance has begun." The broadcast went out across the galaxy. Every species received the message. Every government saw the destruction of New Kansas. Most species were horrified by the brutality. Some species were terrified that they might be next, but there was one species that received the broadcast with a different reaction. On Earth, in the deep bunkers beneath the capital city, men and women in military uniforms watched the footage in silence. They saw the burning cities, they saw the dead children, they saw the execution of Commander Barnes. President Helen Carter stood up slowly. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "Contact Admiral Cross. Tell him that Project Sleeping Giant is now active. Tell him that the gloves are coming off." The message was sent through encrypted channels to military bases across human space. Ships that had been hidden in deep space for decades began to move toward their targets. Weapons that violated galactic treaties were loaded and armed. The true strength of humanity was about to be revealed. War Prime Kethril did not know that his greatest victory was about to become his greatest mistake. He had killed 8,000 humans and thought he was strong. Soon he would learn that he had awakened something that should have been left sleeping. The first sign that something had changed came 3 days after the destruction of New Kansas. Zephyrian scout ships patrolling the border systems began reporting strange readings on their sensors. Massive energy signatures were appearing in empty space where nothing should exist. Ships were coming out of hyperspace, but they were not like any human vessels the Zephyrians had seen before. Admiral Stephen Cross stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution and watched the tactical display. His flagship was 3 kilometers long and bristled with weapons that most species thought were impossible to build. The ship had been hidden in a deep space facility for 20 years, waiting for the day when humanity would need its true military. "Power, all fleet elements report ready for combat," his tactical officer announced. 12 dreadnoughts, 36 cruisers, and 48 destroyers are in position. Cross nodded. The sleeping giant fleet represented only a fraction of humanity's hidden military strength. For decades, while other species saw humans as peaceful traders and explorers, Earth's secret military projects had been building weapons that could reshape the galaxy. "Signal the fleet," Cross ordered. "We are no longer holding back." The Zephyrians wanted to see what humans are capable of when pushed too far. "Show them." Captain Danny Walsh commanded the used Thunderbolt, one of the new destroyer-class ships. He was leading the first wave of humanity's response when his sensors detected a Zephyrian raiding party near the Proxima system. 30 enemy vessels were moving toward another human colony, probably planning to repeat their massacre from New Kansas. "Contact the fleet," Walsh ordered. "We have 30 Zephyrian ships ahead. They appear to be heading for Proxima Colony." His weapons officer looked at the display with concern. "Sir, we only have 12 ships." "They outnumber us more than 2 to 1, Walsh smiled grimly. "Numbers don't matter anymore. These aren't the same ships the Zephyrians have been fighting. Target the lead vessel and prepare to engage." The Zephyrian Commander, War Captain Sifil, watched the approaching human ships with amusement. Only 12 vessels against his fleet of 30. These humans were either very brave or very stupid. Either way, they would be dead within minutes. "All ships prepare." "For combat," Sifil commanded. "Show these humans what happened to their colony will happen to them as well." The first Zephyrian plasma bolts fired across space toward the human ships. The energy weapons that had easily destroyed the New Kansas Defense Force struck the human vessels and simply disappeared. The new human shields absorbed the plasma fire. "Without even flickering. Impossible," Sifil whispered. "Our weapons had no effect at all." Then the human ships returned fire. The energy beams that lanced out from the UES Thunderbolt were unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. They cut through crystalline armor like it was paper. They punched through shields that had protected Zephyrian fleets for centuries. The lead Zephyrian vessel exploded in a ball of fire. Then the second ship died, then the third. Within 2 minutes, half of Sifil's fleet was floating debris in space. "Retreat!" Sifil screamed. "All ships retreat immediately." But it was too late. The human ships moved with impossible speed. They appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking from unexpected angles. Their weapons seemed to bend space itself, creating gravity wells that crushed Zephyrian hulls. Some ships were simply erased from existence by weapons that the Zephyrians had no names for. Walsh watched the destruction from his command chair. "Target their engines, not their life support. We want survivors to carry word back to their empire." "Sir." "Shouldn't we destroy them all?" his weapons officer asked. "No," Walsh replied. "We want them to know what they're facing. Fear is a weapon too." The battle was over in 10 minutes. Every Zephyrian ship was either destroyed or disabled. The few survivors found themselves trapped in crippled vessels, watching human ships that defied everything they thought they knew about technology. War Captain Sifil's ship was one of the few that survived. His engines were destroyed, but his life support was intact. He watched through his viewing port as the human vessels moved around the debris field. They were not looting or capturing prisoners. They were simply making sure no Zephyrian could threaten civilian populations. A human voice came through his communication system. "Zephyrian vessel, this is Captain Walsh of the UES Thunderbolt. Your military threat has been neutralized. You are free to return to your territory and report what you have witnessed here." Sifil could barely speak. "What are you?" "Your ships move like nothing we have seen. Your weapons ignore our defenses. How is this possible?" "We tried to tell you," Walsh replied. "We tried to warn you that attacking our civilians would force us to respond. You chose not to listen." The human ships activated their tractor beams and began pushing the disabled Zephyrian vessels toward the edge of the system. They were being sent home as messengers, not prisoners. "Tell your war prime that this is what happens when humans take." "The gloves off," Walsh said. "Tell him that every military target in Zephyrian space is now marked for destruction. Tell him that he has one chance to surrender before we visit his homeworld." News of the battle spread through Zephyrian space like wildfire. Reports came in from across their territory of human fleets appearing everywhere. Military bases that had stood for centuries were being reduced to scrap metal. Weapons platforms that guarded important worlds were being dismantled piece by piece. But the humans were not targeting civilian populations. They were not destroying cities or killing non-combatants. They were systematically eliminating every military asset the Zephyrian Empire possessed while leaving the civilian infrastructure intact. War Prime Kethril received the reports in his command center on the Zephyrian homeworld. Each message was worse than the last. The 7th Fleet was destroyed. The 9th Battle Group was missing. The defense platforms around Zephyr Prime were offline. How many ships do they have? Kethril demanded. We estimate at least 300 capital ships, his intelligence officer reported. But they may have more. Some of our scouts report seeing vessels that are 5 kilometers long. Ships that size should not be able to move as fast as they do. Kethril stared at the tactical display. Red markers showed the locations of destroyed Zephyrian forces. Green markers showed the positions of human fleets. The humans were everywhere at once, striking with precision and overwhelming force. Where did these ships come from? Kethril asked. Our intelligence report said the humans only had a few dozen patrol vessels. We were wrong, the intelligence officer admitted. It appears that humanity has been hiding their true military strength for decades. While we saw them as weak traders, they were building weapons that surpass anything in the known galaxy. The galactic news networks were broadcasting footage of the human military response. Other species watched in shock as vessels that dwarfed their own capital ships moved through space with impossible grace. Weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics tore through defenses that had been considered impregnable. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss the implications of humanity's revealed strength. Many were terrified that Earth might turn its weapons against them next. The humans have been living among us for 50 years, the Altarian representative said. They attended our trade conferences, they signed our peace treaties. They helped U.S. resolve disputes between other species. All this time, they possessed the power to conquer the entire galaxy. But they chose not to, the Centauran delegate pointed out. They could have demanded tribute or seized territory. Instead, they traded fairly and respected our sovereignty. They only revealed their strength when forced to defend their people. The debate continued for hours. Some species called for immediate diplomatic contact with Earth. Others suggested forming a coalition to contain human expansion. A few brave voices suggested that humanity might be the best hope for galactic peace. Meanwhile, Admiral Cross was preparing for the final phase of the operation. The Zephyrian military had been broken, but their leadership remained defiant. It was time to visit their homeworld and end this war once and for all. Signal the fleet, Cross ordered. Set course for Zephyr Prime. It's time to show War Prime Kethril what happens when you ignore humanity's final warning. The massive human fleet turned toward the heart of the Zephyrian Empire. Behind them, the wreckage of enemy ships drifted in space as silent testimony to the price of underestimating humanity. The gloves were off, and the galaxy would never be the same again. Admiral Stephen Cross stood before the main viewing screen as his fleet approached. Zephyr Prime, the Zephyrian homeworld, was a beautiful crystalline planet that sparkled like a jewel in space. Massive orbital stations surrounded it like protective rings. These stations had defended the planet for over 1,000 years and were considered impossible to destroy. 50 ships reporting ready for final assault, his tactical officer announced. All systems are operational. Cross watched the enemy defenses. The orbital stations were huge structures, each one the size of a small moon. They bristled with PLA SMA cannons and particle beam weapons. Energy shields that could stop entire fleets protected each station. The Zephyrians had built these defenses to withstand any possible attack. Signal the fleet, Cross ordered. Disable the stations, but do not destroy them completely. We want to make a point about precision, not create a massacre. The first wave of human ships moved toward the orbital defenses. The massive stations opened fire with everything they had. Plasma bolts that could vaporize mountains streaked through space. Energy beams that could cut through solid rock lanced out toward the human vessels. The weapons struck the human ships and simply disappeared. The new human shields absorbed the energy and converted it into power for their own systems. The more the Zephyrians fired, the stronger the human ships became. "Impossible," whispered Defense Commander Kyloth from the Central Command Station. "Our most powerful weapons are not even scratching their hulls." Then the human ships returned fire. Focused. Gravity beams reached out and crushed the weapon systems on the first station. The massive plasma cannons that had protected Zephyr Prime for centuries were turned into twisted metal in seconds. The shield generators that powered the station's defenses were simply erased from existence. "All stations concentrate fire on the lead human vessel," Kyloth commanded desperately. Every orbital platform turned its weapons toward Admiral Cross's flagship. The combined firepower of 12 battle stations struck the UES Retribution at the same moment. The energy release was so massive that it lit up space like a small star. When the light faded, the Retribution was still there. Its shields had not even flickered. The ship moved forward calmly as if nothing had happened. "This is Admiral Cross of the United Earth Fleet," came a voice over the communication channels. "Zephyr Prime orbital defenses. You are ordered to surrender immediately. Your weapons cannot harm our ships. Continued resistance will result in the complete destruction of your defensive grid." Commander Kyloth stared at his tactical display. His most powerful weapons had no effect at all. The human ship was moving toward his command station like an unstoppable force of nature. "All stations cease fire," Kyloth ordered with a heavy heart. "We cannot fight what we cannot hurt." One by one, the orbital stations went silent. Their weapons powered down and their shields collapsed. The defenses that had protected the Zephyrian homeworld for a millennium were neutralized in less than 30 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Sam Mitchell led the first wave of human ground forces as they landed in the capital city of Zephyr Prime. His soldiers wore powered armor that made them look like metal giants. The armor was equipped with personal shield generators and weapons that could adjust their power level from stun to complete destruction. The Zephyrian civilians in the streets stopped and stared as the human soldiers marched through their crystal cities. The humans moved with perfect coordination, their heavy boots ringing against the crystalline roads. But they were not destroying buildings or threatening civilians. They were heading directly for the Imperial Palace. "All civilians remain in your homes," Mitchell announced through his suit speakers. "Human forces are here to end the war, not to harm innocent people. Anyone who does not interfere will not be harmed." War Prime Kethro rallied his remaining forces at the Imperial Palace. His personal guard consisted of 50 of the finest Zephyrian warriors. They wore the traditional ceremonial armor of their ancestors and carried weapons that had been blessed by their war gods. "Today we make our final stand," Kethro told his warriors. "These humans may have superior technology, but we have the courage of our fathers. We will show them that Zephyrians do not surrender." The palace doors were built from solid crystal and were 20 feet thick. They had never been breached in the entire history of the Zephyrian Empire. Kethro was confident that the humans would have to siege the palace for months before they could break through. Mitchell looked at the massive doors and activated his suit's cutting beam. The focused energy sliced through the crystal like it was glass. Within minutes, the doors that had protected Zephyrian rulers for centuries were reduced to rubble. "Breach complete," Mitchell reported to his men. "Remember the rules of engagement. We want prisoners, not bodies." The human soldiers advanced into the palace halls. Zephyrian warriors attacked them with plasma rifles and crystal swords. The weapons that could cut through normal armor bounced harmlessly off the human suits. The soldiers responded with stunner beams that knocked the Zephyrians unconscious without causing permanent harm. "Their armor is invincible." One Zephyrian warrior gasped as his sword shattered against a human soldier's chest plate. "And their weapons do not kill." Another observed as he was hit by a stunner beam and fell to the floor paralyzed. The battle moved through the palace corridors as human forces advanced toward the throne room. Zephyrian defenders fought bravely but uselessly. Their weapons could not penetrate human armor and their shields could not stop human stunners. Mitchell reached the throne room doors and found Kethril waiting for him. The War Prime stood alone in the center of the vast chamber. His personal guards lay unconscious around him, victims of human stun weapons. "So the mighty human warriors finally show themselves," Kethril said. "You hide behind your armor like cowards. Face me in single combat if you have any honor." Mitchell removed his helmet and looked at the War Prime. His face was marked by grief for the civilians who had died on New Kansas. His eyes showed the weight of command and the burden of necessary violence. "I am not here to prove my honor," Mitchell said calmly. "I am here to end a war that should never have started." Kethril raised his crystal sword. "Then you will have to kill me. I will never surrender to an inferior species." "You are not inferior," Mitchell replied. "You are defeated." "There is a difference." The War Prime lunged forward with his sword raised. Mitchell did not draw a weapon. Instead, he activated his suit's defensive field. The crystal blade struck the energy barrier and shattered into 1,000 pieces. Kethril stared at the broken weapon in his hand. "Impossible. This sword was forged by the greatest weaponsmiths of my people. It has never failed in battle." "Your technology is good," Mitchell said. "But our technology is better. We have had more time to develop it." Mitchell raised his stunner and set it to its lowest setting. "War Prime Kethril, by the authority of the United Earth Fleet, you are under arrest for war crimes against civilian populations. You will be transported to a neutral world to stand trial." "I am a warrior," Kethril protested. "I die in battle or not at all." "You are a war criminal," Mitchell corrected, "and you will face justice for what you did to New Kansas." The stunner beam hit Kethril, and he collapsed to the floor unconscious. The last leader of the Zephyrian military was now a prisoner of the people he had tried to destroy. Mitchell activated his communicator. "Palace secured. Primary target is in custody. No human casualties." Admiral Cross received the report on his flagship. "Excellent work, Colonel. Begin Phase 2 of the occupation. Secure all government buildings and communication centers. I want every member of the Zephyrian leadership in custody within the hour." The human forces moved through the capital city with mechanical efficiency. Government officials who had supported the war were arrested. Military commanders who had ordered attacks on civilians were taken into custody. But ordinary citizens were left alone to continue their lives. Within 6 hours, the entire Zephyrian government was under human control. The empire that had terrorized other species for centuries was now occupied by the people they had dismissed as weak prey animals. Cross stood on the observation deck of his flagship and looked down at Zephyr Prime. The planet was intact and its people were safe. The human forces had achieved total victory without destroying a single civilian target. "Send a message to Earth Command," Cross ordered. "Mission accomplished. The Zephyrian Empire is neutralized. Awaiting instructions for the next phase." The response came back within hours. Earth had decided that the Zephyrian leaders would face trial for their crimes. The Empire would be dissolved and its territory redistributed to the species they had oppressed. War Prime Kethril and his commanders would answer for the massacre at New Kansas. The galaxy watched in amazement as humanity demonstrated restraint even in total victory. They could have destroyed Zephyr Prime and slaughtered its people. Instead, they have removed the threat while preserving innocent lives. This was not the behavior of conquerors. This was the behavior of protectors. For the first time, other species began to understand that humanity's hidden strength came with wisdom and mercy. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months after the fall of Zephyr Prime, the War Crimes Tribunal began on Sanctuary Prime. The neutral world had been chosen because it belonged to no major power and had a reputation for fair justice. Representatives from dozens of species came to witness the trial of War Prime Kethril and his commanders. Judge Patricia Stone, sat behind the high bench in the courtroom. She was a human legal expert who had spent 30 years studying galactic law. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes showed no emotion as she looked down at the defendants. The galaxy was watching this trial, and she knew that justice had to be both fair and seen to be fair. War Prime Kethril stood in the defendant's dock wearing simple, gray clothing instead of his crystalline armor, the proud warrior who had terrorized. Other species looked smaller somehow, without his weapons and symbols of power. Behind him sat 12 other Zephyrian commanders who had participated in the attacks on human colonies. War Prime Kethril, Judge Stone began, you are charged with crimes against sentient beings under the Galactic Accords. Specifically, you are accused of ordering deliberate attacks on civilian populations, targeting non-combatants including children, and executing prisoners of war. How do you plead? Kethril stood up slowly. Even in defeat, he maintained his warrior's pride. I plead that I was following the natural order of the universe. The strong have always conquered the weak. This is the way of all life. That is not a recognized plea under galactic law, Judge Stone replied. You must plead guilty or not guilty to the specific charges. Then I plead guilty, Kethril said defiantly. I'm guilty of being strong enough to take what I wanted. I'm guilty of showing other species their proper place in the universe. The courtroom fell silent. Even his own defense attorney looked shocked. A guilty plea would make the trial much shorter, but it also meant certain conviction. The prosecution began presenting evidence of the attacks on human colonies. Videos showed the destruction of New Kansas. Hospital records documented the casualties. Survivors gave testimony about watching their families die. Paul Johnson took the witness stand. On the third day of the trial, he had survived the attack on New Kansas along with his wife Mary and their twin daughters Amy and Kate. His voice was steady as he described watching his world burn. My daughters were 8 years old, Paul said as he looked directly at Kethril. They had never hurt anyone in their lives. They were playing in our fields when your ships arrived. We hid in the emergency shelter and listened to our city being destroyed above us. Paul's voice broke slightly as he continued. When your soldiers found us, they pointed weapons at my children, 8-year-old girls who had never seen violence. Before, you were going to kill them because they might grow up to be enemies. Kethril showed no emotion as he listened to the testimony. He had heard it all before and felt no regret for his actions. The trial continued for 2 weeks. Witness. After witness described the brutality of the Zephyrian attacks. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. 8,000 civilians had died in attacks that targeted hospitals, schools, and homes. When it came time for the defense, Kethril's attorney tried to argue that his client was following the customs of his people. Zephyrian culture had always been based on conquest and warfare. War Prime Kethril was simply doing what his ancestors had done for thousands of years. The defendant was raised in a society that values military strength above all else, the defense attorney argued. He was taught from childhood that conquest was not only acceptable, but necessary for survival. He cannot be held responsible for following the beliefs of his entire civilization. Judge Stone listened to the arguments, but her expression never changed. Cultural differences could explain behavior, but they could not excuse war crimes. The Galactic Accords applied to all species equally. On the final day of the trial, Judge Stone delivered her verdict. The courtroom was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. News crews broadcast the proceedings to billions of viewers on hundreds of worlds. War Prime Kethril, Judge Stone began, you have been found guilty of all charges against you. The evidence shows that you deliberately targeted civilian populations with the intent to cause maximum suffering. You ordered the execution of prisoners. You showed no mercy to non-combatants, including children. She paused and looked directly at the former War Prime. While the court recognizes that you were following the customs of your people, ignorance of the law is not a defense. The Galactic Accords clearly prohibit attacks on civilian targets. Every species that signed those accords agreed to follow them. The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Kethril would spend the rest of his days in a secure facility on a remote world. His commanders received similar sentences ranging from 50 years to life depending on their level of involvement. Kethr Idle stood up when the sentence was announced. I do not recognize the authority of this court. I am a warrior of the Zephyrian Empire, and I answer only to the war gods of my people. The Zephyrian Empire no longer exists, Judge Stone replied calmly. It was dissolved by the Galactic Council. After its defeat, you are now simply a convicted war criminal. The former war prime was led away in restraints. He would never again command fleets or threaten innocent people. The galaxy had seen that even the most powerful conquerors could be brought to justice. In the months following the trial, the former Zephyrian territory was redistributed. Species that had been oppressed by the Zephyrian Empire were given their freedom. Worlds that had been stripped of their resources were helped to rebuild. The ordinary Zephyrian people, who had never chosen to follow Kethril's path of conquest, were allowed to form a new government based on peaceful cooperation. Admiral Stephen Cross oversaw the transition process. His fleet remained in the region to maintain peace and prevent any attempts to restart the old empire. But the humans made it clear that they were not interested in ruling other species. We did not fight this war to gain territory, Cross explained to the Galactic Council. We fought to protect our people and to ensure that such attacks never happen again. Now that the threat is ended, we want to return to peaceful cooperation with all species. Captain Jake Morrison, who had commanded the diplomatic mission that started the crisis, was promoted to admiral and put in charge of the new galactic peacekeeping force. Ships from many different species joined the force to prevent future wars and protect civilian populations. The memorial on New Kansas was completed 1 year after the attack. The names of all 8,000 victims were carved into black stone that reflected the light of the colony's yellow sun. Children played in the rebuilt towns while their parents worked the fields that had once been battlegrounds. Paul Johnson brought his daughters to the memorial on the anniversary of the attack. Amy and Kate, now 9 years old, placed flowers at the base of the monument. They remembered the fear and the darkness, but they also remembered that someone had come to help them. Why did the bad people attack us, Daddy? Kate asked as they stood before the memorial. Paul thought carefully about his answer. Because they thought that being strong meant hurting others. They forgot that real strength comes from protecting people, not conquering them. Ambassador Lisa Hayes addressed the Galactic Council on the 5th anniversary of the war. The chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of species, many of whom had been enemies before the Zephyrian crisis brought them together. 5 years ago, humanity revealed military capabilities that shocked the galaxy, Hayes said. We did not want to show that power. We preferred to be known as traders and explorers, not as warriors. But sometimes peaceful people must fight to protect what they love. She looked around the chamber at the assembled delegates. The lesson of the Zephyrian War is not that might makes right. The lesson is that those who have might must use it. Wisely, humanity could have conquered half the galaxy with the weapons we revealed. Instead, we chose to use our strength to build a better future for all species. The Galactic Council had grown from 12 member species to over 200. In the years since the war, trade flowed freely between worlds. Scientific knowledge was shared openly. Disputes were resolved through negotiation rather than violence. Not everyone was happy with the new order. Some species still believed that the strong should rule the weak, but they remembered what had happened to the Zephyrian Empire when it ignored humanity's final warning. They chose to work within the system rather than challenge it directly. War Prime. Kethril spent his days in his prison cell on the remote world of Isolation 7. He had been offered the chance to participate in rehabilitation programs or to learn new skills. He refused all such offers. He preferred to maintain his warrior's pride even in defeat. Sometimes he thought about the humans who had destroyed his empire. He still could not understand how a species that seemed so weak had possessed such devastating power. He had dismissed their warnings as empty threats and learned too late that humanity's restraint had been a choice, not a weakness. The galaxy had learned the same lesson. Humanity's final warning had been exactly that, final. Those who chose to ignore it did so at their own peril, but those who chose to work with humans found them to be generous allies and fair partners.